November 22nd, 1963. America's heart stops beating as a president is shot in Dallas. September 11th, 2001. The world watches in horror as the word terror receives a new definition. And December 7th, 1941, a day that still lives in infamy, when America was forced into the most catastrophic war in human history. All of these dates are embedded in our consciousness. All are surrounded by controversy. But the events that took place at Pearl Harbor have retained a special meaning for Americans. We were compelled into fighting a world war that few wanted. By the time that war ended, America and the world would never be the same. America had become a target. What really happened on December 7th, 1941? What lessons did we learn? What lessons should we have learned? On Unsolved History, the myths of Pearl Harbor. This is one of America's most sacred places, the Arizona Memorial. Here, the names of 1,177 of the dead of Pearl Harbor are inscribed. Their war ended suddenly in a blaze of fire and eternal glory. They never had time to look back at the events of December 7th. Their war was over. But for survivors like Will Lehner, the battle with remembrance was only beginning. Now, 61 years later, Will is going back to his own ground zero to confront the past, which has never quite left him.
It's going to be a fulfillment of my lifetime. I never thought that I would ever be able to come back and go down and see that 1,200 feet down. That is something that I think it'll be a closure for me.
This is the way history has taught Pearl Harbor. The Americans were caught totally by surprise. The Japanese aerial attack was an unqualified success, and their attack by sea a total failure. History says that the Japanese fired the first shots, and given some warning, the U.S. forces could have repelled the Japanese attack. History may be wrong.
It's a well-used cliche that we are doomed to repeat history, but it seems clear from what happened on 9/11, we have not fully learned the lessons of Pearl Harbor.
There had been a whole series of scares and alerts prior to the attack, and nothing had come of them. And the Americans had become complacent. They really didn't want war, therefore they weren't looking for it. And when it happened, it caught them by surprise.
Over 60 years later, the horror of that day is still burned into the memory of those who were there. Phil Rasmussen was the only American pilot who managed to shoot down a Japanese fighter.
There was absolutely fire everywhere, destruction everywhere. And as I looked towards Pearl Harbor, all I could see was a huge cloud of black smoke with red flame exploding.
Joe Lockhart saw the approaching aerial armada on his radar screen.
It was the largest thing I'd ever seen on the scope, and was very large, was moving. It had to be aircraft.
Kermit Tyler received Lockhart's warning. The verdict of history is harsh on his response.
I told him, don't worry about it, it's okay.
Fighter pilot Jim Daniels was shot at by his own countrymen.
It was just horrible. Ships were blowing up. It was just utter devastation. It was just hard to believe.
But was the United States really caught by surprise on December 7th? Would more of a warning have made any difference? And perhaps the most crucial question, was the United States simply doomed to defeat that morning due to superior Japanese tactics and firepower?
Yeah, something like that. That puts right over. This would be the highest spot on that floor.
Unsolved History has assembled an investigative team to answer these questions. This investigative team will put history to the test as we explore the myths of Pearl Harbor. Our investigation begins 5 miles away from Waikiki Beach. Here, 1,200 feet down, a ghost from the past has been found. The sub had been sunk early on the morning of December 7th, 1941, by an American destroyer, the USS Ward. This wreck is revealing secrets to our cameras that explode one of the greatest myths of Pearl Harbor. For the real attack began by sea, over 4 hours before the first Japanese planes arrived. And in this battle, the Americans fired the first shots.
The attack on Pearl Harbor is largely remembered as a massive carrier airstrike. However, the attack was not only from the air, but from the sea. The Japanese unleashed that day a secret weapon, 5 lethal cigar-shaped vessels, the so-called midget subs.
These 2-man vessels were nearly 80 feet long and carried 2 torpedoes each. They were strapped to the decks of full-size mother submarines. About 10 miles outside Pearl Harbor, they would detach their passengers. These 5 subs would then sneak into Pearl Harbor, attacking the American ships from below. They carried just 2 crew members and were powered by batteries. These batteries were their only source of power. At top speed, they would last only 55 minutes. This propaganda film, captured during the war, depicted the 2-man crew comfortably working. But the reality was very different.
The conditions inside this midget submarine were deplorable. It was hot, humid, and smelly. The temperature could get up to nearly 150 degrees. The glamour of this submarine is soon lost when you climb in one, because they are iron coffins.
In terms of navigation, all they had were their eyes and the gyro compass. The gyro compass could be knocked out of whack, so they often had to rely solely on looking through the periscope.
In the year before the attack, the Japanese had carefully studied Pearl Harbor. Their spies had provided detailed descriptions of the layout to the Imperial Command. The harbor entrance was narrow, less than 375 yards wide. With an average depth of only 40 feet, the harbor was shallow. No known submarine could sneak in undetected. And the Navy had taken other precautions.
There were torpedo nets across the harbor. Now, these were not designed to keep out submarines. They were designed to keep torpedoes from being fired up the throat of the harbor and disabling an American ship and blocking off the harbor entrance.
But the Japanese came prepared.
The forward part of the vessel, known as the bow, is accented by these net cutters. These were intended to cut through anti-submarine nets and not foul up the vessel. These caps underneath them are the torpedoes. There are 2 of them. The torpedoes themselves, nearly 18 feet long. The explosive power of the warhead, 760 pounds of TNT.